the Three Witches of Mexico City. 3 exiled continental artists who earned frenemy status with none other than Frida Kahlo, who allegedly called them those European bitches. They were genre-bending surrealists, incorporating symbols associated with their spiritual interest in pre-Columbian mythology, the occult, tarot, and astrology, along with the more recognisable surrealist dreamscapes. They were practical jokers who reportedly cackled as they baked hair into pies. They were Leonora Carrington, Remedios Varo, and Kati Horna. Their Mexican City mythos is intoxicating, but how did these unlikely European exiles become surrealist standouts? Turns out, you can't create a coven without a few trauma bonds, and boy did they have more than a few. So buckle up as we dig into each witch's origin story. Shit will get weird. To understand the witches, we first need to talk Surrealism, which if you've heard of it may conjure up thoughts of melting clocks, Salvador Dali's moustache, or the worst acid trip you've ever had in your life. It started in 1924 when French writer and poet André Breton wrote the first Surrealist manifesto. He defined Surrealism as pure psychic automism, by which we propose to express verbally, in writing, or by any other means the real process of thought, the dictation of thought in the absence of any control exercised by reason and outside any aesthetic or moral preoccupations. Which loosely translates to Surrealism is the hot nonsense your unconscious brain spits out. Breton credited the concept to Sigmund Freud, who'd found the time in his lunch breaks from curing women's hysteria by x-raying their ovaries to develop therapeutic methods such as dream interpretation and evaluation of the subconscious. The resulting surrealist art was unsurprisingly weird AF. Early surrealist works were predominantly what's known as automatic writing. Poets and writers would just jot down their literal stream of consciousness, kind of like voice messages from friends at 2 a.m. But the movement was defined by the early visual art like Salvador Dali's Dreamscapes and René Magritte's This Is Not a Pipe. And while Dali, Magritte, Breton, and many other men of similar age were sat chuffing their durries at Café de Flore, our future witchy icons were mere babes. Leonora Carrington was the youngest of the Coven. Born in England in 1918, she was enamoured with Surrealism by the age of 10. She was raised in a super strict environment, yet didn't give 2 hoots about authority, and was expelled from multiple schools before enrolling in Ozenfant Academy of Fine Art in London. Here Leonora could finally escape her parents' gaze and get feral with her artistic peers. At 19, she met German surrealist Max Ernst, who was 46, and the pair bonded very quickly. They bonded so well, in fact, that Ernst left his wife and fled to Paris with a barely legal Leonora in tow. I mean, who knows? Maybe it was true love, but I hazard to guess it was more to do with the founding surrealists having a pretty cooked perspective on women, especially young women. Aside from Dali's outright erotophobia, the group developed the concept of the femme enfant, literally the child woman, who's an idealized muse, an immature, intuitive, young, and subservient little idiot. Yep. Ernst probably thought he'd found his perfect femme enfant in Leonora. He was sorely mistaken. She was a quick study, painting some of her most important early works like The Inn of the Dawn Horse, portraying a frustrated debutante with beastly hair, and Portrait of Max Ernst, all guided by his, experienced tutelage. It wasn't long before the relationship hit an obvious roadblock. Surprisingly not the age gap, but the outbreak of World War II. Ernst, as a German living in Paris, was quickly arrested. Twice. First by the French authorities, then again, more concerningly, by the Gestapo for his engagement in degenerate art. Leonora was understandably rattled and suffered a nervous breakdown of Britney Jean Spears proportions, experiencing extreme anxiety and disordered eating. This earned her admission into an asylum in Spain, where she was fed drugs and endured shock therapy, before her family busted her out and booked her into yet another sanatorium in South Africa. In her drug-addled and committed state, how exactly did Leonora end up in Mexico? Well, at a stop in Portugal while en route to South Africa, she legged it. In Lisbon, she met up with a friend and Mexican poet Renato de Luc, who agreed to marry her in order to get her safely to Mexico City. Meanwhile, her aged lover Ernst eventually escaped the Gestapo and ran off to New York City with Peggy Guggenheim and married her within a year. Savage. Ah well. You know what they say, people are either in your orbit for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Ernst was a reason for Leonora, but Remedios Varo was for her lifetime. Though Remedios, I'ma call her Remy, was Spanish and almost 10 years Leonora's senior, the pair were twin flames. Like Leonora, Remy was also brought up in a straight-laced household and sent to a strict convent school as a child. Unlike her loose unit of a friend, she managed to stay in school, eventually enrolling in a prestigious art academy in Madrid, a city increasingly influenced by the Surrealist movement in France. With political tensions rising in Madrid, Remy and her Surrealist classmate turned husband Gerardo left for Paris around 1931. They moved on to Barcelona a year later. Remy and her husband had a modern marriage arrangement. Both parties earned an income, and both parties enjoyed extramarital lovers within the avant-garde art circle of Barcelona. By the time the Spanish Civil War was raging in 1937, Remy left Barcelona for France, sans the husband, but with two Surrealist poets in tow. Through these trysts and her own artistic merit, obviously, she quickly established herself in the Parisian Surrealist scene with founders Breton, Dali, Ernst, and of course, Leonora. Alas, 2 years later, the fascist tides from World War II not only prevented her from returning to Spain, but also made it incredibly dangerous to stay in Paris. When France was eventually occupied, Remy was imprisoned for an unknown amount of time. Although she was eventually released, it was clear she needed to yeet out of Europe stat. Not much is known about how Remy got to Mexico from France, likely because many Spanish refugees who sought asylum there were granted automatic citizenship. In Mexico City, she reconnected with her scattered group of European exiles, including Leonora, and she'd also picked up some new friends along the way. One of these friends was Kati Horna, the final piece of the Three Witches puzzle. How Kati and Remy didn't cross paths earlier, I do not know, though it might have something to do with Kati's tendency to rush towards whatever Remy was fleeing from. Kati grew up in a Jewish Austrian household in Budapest. Though her family had started fairly well off, the entire Austrian-Hungarian Empire became skint between World War I and World War II, so she took up photography as a side hustle for a bit of extra cash. Can neither confirm nor deny whether feet pics were involved. As it turns out, Kati wasn't half bad at taking photos. Actually, in 1902, by the time she was 20, she was an apprentice to photographer Joseph Pesci and studying at an upper-crust art school in Budapest. She had a unique eye for composition. Where her male counterparts pointed the lens at the conflict in the early 20th century, Kati would photograph the civilian fallout, often capturing the experience of war for women, children, and the common worker. In 1933, the year after Remy left Paris, Kati moved in. Like Remy before her and Leonora to come, Kati experimented in the Parisian Surrealist art scene, joining the ranks of other esteemed photographers such as Man Ray and Lee Miller. Though she was certifiably arty, Kati also enjoyed early commercial success and worked closely with publications as a photojournalist. So when the Spanish Civil War broke out, she was sent to Barcelona to photograph the experience, just as Remy was getting the heck out of there. Seeing conflict and its effect on communities gave Kati a staunchly progressive political viewpoint. Her work clearly didn't align with fascist values. This meant when the Spanish resistance fell, she was chased out of Spain by fascist authorities and had to return to Paris in 1939. She barely had time to light a ciggy by the Seine before the outbreak of World War II and the subsequent occupation of France put her, a Jewish and anti-fascist artist, in deep doo-doo. Kati had to flee once again, and this time she went with the overwhelming tide of exiles headed to Mexico City. No bond is grander than a trauma bond, and in this new city, on this new continent, Leonora, Remy, Kati, and a large circle of immigrants created another artistic centre. At Remy's house, she, Leonora, and Kati, plus a host of other local and expat artists, would gather and drink copious amounts of alcohol. It might have seemed like an unlikely hub for Parisian Surrealist culture, but a confluence of factors made Mexico a perfect home for the three artists to form their coven in. Mexico had already produced some of the best of the 20th century, such as Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. It wasn't just the vibrant art scene that captured their imaginations. It was also the rich pre-Columbian mythologies and indigenous matriarchal societies. And sure, the peyote was an added bonus. The heady combo resulted in genre-bending surrealist work, taking a simple premise from a French dude in 1924 and transforming it into something rich, ancient, and magic. Pretty far from a femme enfant, if you ask me. And that's all from me. Thank you.